The perfect prison. Imagine waking up every morning knowing exactly how your day will unfold. The same office. The same desk. The same routine. The same expectations. And the same feeling that something important is missing. Not for a day. Not for a week. But for years. This is where our story begins. At first glance, Tom Norrie appears to be one of the luckiest young men in America. He comes from a respected family. He has a secure position in a thriving business. His future seems guaranteed. He possesses something millions of people spend their lives chasing: financial security. Most people looking at Tom would probably envy him. They would see his success. They would see his opportunities. They would see his wealth. But they would never see the prison he lives in. Because the most powerful prisons are often invisible. And Tom Norrie's prison is built not from iron bars, but from expectations. Our story opens inside the enormous offices of Norrie, Trumbull and Company. The office is alive with activity. Clerks rush between desks carrying papers. Typewriters click endlessly. Bookkeepers calculate figures. Messengers hurry through crowded aisles. Every person seems absorbed in work. The entire room vibrates with productivity. Everything is moving. Everything except Tom. At his desk sits a young man of 29. In front of him are mountains of unfinished paperwork. Letters waiting for approval. Checks waiting for signatures. Business contracts requiring immediate attention. Every document represents responsibility. Every document demands action. Normally, Tom would handle these tasks immediately. In fact, throughout his career, he has been known for his efficiency. He hates unfinished work. He hates disorder. He hates postponement. The idea of leaving today's work for tomorrow has always disturbed him. Yet today something is different. Today he simply sits. His hands remain buried in his pockets. His eyes stare into empty space. He does nothing. Minutes pass. Then hours. The office continues moving around him like a giant machine. But Tom remains motionless. Why? Because something inside him has finally broken. Many people imagine burnout as an explosive event. A dramatic breakdown. A public collapse. But often burnout arrives quietly. One day you simply cannot continue pretending. One day the motivation disappears. One day the purpose vanishes. And suddenly everything that once seemed important feels meaningless. That day has arrived for Tom Norrie. The tragedy is that his life wasn't always like this. Years earlier he was completely different. Before entering the business world, Tom was full of energy. He loved adventure. He loved learning. He loved discovering new places. He imagined a future filled with possibility. Like many young people, he believed adulthood would expand his world. Instead, adulthood shrank it. When college ended, Tom entered the family business. Everyone expected it. His father expected it. His relatives expected it. Society expected it. There was never really a question. This was simply what Norrie men did. Generation after generation had entered the business. Generation after generation had sacrificed personal dreams for commercial success. Tom followed the same path. At first he assumed it would only be temporary. He believed he could balance work with personal interests. He thought he would still have time for books. Time for travel. Time for adventure. Time for life. How wrong he was. The business consumed everything. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Every morning he entered the office. Every evening he left exhausted. The pattern repeated endlessly. Slowly, almost invisibly, his dreams began disappearing. The books he intended to read remained unopened. The places he wanted to visit remained unseen. The adventures he imagined never happened. Instead, he became increasingly skilled at managing paperwork. Increasingly efficient at generating profits. Increasingly valuable to the company. And increasingly disconnected from himself. This is one of the most powerful ideas in the story. Success and fulfillment are not always the same thing. A person can achieve every goal society celebrates and still feel empty inside. Tom has achieved success. But he has lost something far more valuable. He has lost his sense of purpose. As he sits at his desk that afternoon, he begins observing the world around him differently. For years he saw the office as a place of opportunity. Now he sees it as a factory consuming human lives. The clerks around him suddenly appear trapped. Many have spent decades performing the same routine. Some are old men now. Their entire lives have unfolded between these walls. What once seemed normal now feels terrifying. Tom begins asking questions. Questions he has avoided for years. What is all this for? Why are we doing this? How much money is enough? At what point does success become slavery? These questions have no easy answers. That is why most people avoid them. They bury themselves in work. They distract themselves with entertainment. They fill every moment with activity. Anything to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. Tom has done the same thing. For years he stayed busy. For years he ignored his doubts. For years he convinced himself that happiness would arrive later. After the next promotion. After the next raise. After the next achievement. But happiness never arrived. Only more work. More responsibility. More pressure. And now, sitting in that office, he realizes something shocking. The life he has built is not the life he wanted. Outside the windows, spring has arrived. Warm breezes drift through the city. Sunlight floods the streets. Nature is waking from winter. Everything outside seems alive. Everything inside feels dead. The contrast affects Tom deeply. The fresh air reminds him of what he has lost. Freedom. Spontaneity. Wonder. The simple joy of being alive. He remembers who he used to be. The young man who loved the outdoors. The young man who dreamed of traveling the world. The young man who believed life was meant to be experienced. That young man feels very far away now. The business has transformed him. Not physically. Emotionally. Spiritually. Psychologically. He has become cautious. Predictable. Controlled. Safe. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. The business has not merely taken his time. It has changed who he is. At this moment another important realization begins forming. Tom understands that nobody forced him to remain. The prison door was never locked. Yet he stayed. Why? Because comfort can become a trap. Security can become a trap. Expectation can become a trap. People often remain in unhappy situations because leaving feels risky. Tom remained because the business offered certainty. Certainty of income. Certainty of status. Certainty of approval. But certainty has a cost. The cost is freedom. The cost is growth. The cost is possibility. And now, after 8 years, Tom is beginning to understand that price. Across the office, employees occasionally glance in his direction. They notice his unusual behavior. They sense something is wrong. But they do not understand. How could they? Most of them have accepted the system completely. The routine feels normal. The sacrifice feels necessary. The struggle feels unavoidable. Tom once felt the same way. Now he sees things differently. And once a person truly sees a prison, it becomes almost impossible to remain comfortable inside it. The realization grows stronger with every passing minute. He cannot continue living this way. Something must change. The question is what? Most people reach moments like this and retreat. They return to familiar routines. They suppress uncomfortable thoughts. They convince themselves to keep going. Tom is standing at that crossroads. One path leads back into the safety of habit. The other leads into uncertainty. Into risk. Into freedom. At this moment he does not yet know which path he will choose. But deep inside, the decision has already begun. The rebellion has started. Not against his employer. Not against his family. Not against society. Against the fear that has controlled him for years. Against the belief that money is more important than life. Against the idea that success must come before happiness. The office continues buzzing around him. Typewriters continue clicking. Clerks continue working. Business continues as usual. Yet everything has changed. Because one man has begun questioning the rules. And every great transformation begins with a question. What if there is another way to live? For Tom Norrie, that question will change everything. And before this day ends, he will take the first step toward freedom. A step that will shock everyone around him. A step that will alter the course of his life forever. But that story begins in the next chapter. And it begins with rebellion. The day of rebellion. At some point in every person's life, a moment arrives when continuing becomes harder than changing. For some people, that moment comes after a tragedy. For others, it comes after failure. And for a few, it arrives quietly, during an ordinary day that appears completely normal from the outside. For Tom Norrie, that day had finally arrived. The office around him continued operating like a perfectly tuned machine. Clerks moved between desks. Telephones rang. Pens scratched across paper. The business world carried on exactly as it always had. But inside Tom, something irreversible had happened. For the first time in 8 years, he no longer cared. Not about the contracts. Not about the reports. Not about the endless stream of numbers that had dominated his life. The strange thing about personal revolutions is that they often begin in silence. No one around Tom knew what was happening inside his mind. To them, he was simply sitting at his desk. But internally, an entire world was collapsing. The beliefs that had guided his life were beginning to fall apart. For years he had accepted certain ideas without question. Hard work leads to happiness. Success requires sacrifice. Money creates freedom. The future is worth postponing the present. But now he saw the contradictions. If hard work created happiness, why was he miserable? If success created fulfillment, why did he feel empty? If money created freedom, why did he feel trapped? These questions echoed through his mind. And the more he thought about them, the more impossible it became to return to business as usual. Eventually, someone noticed. One of the office workers glanced toward Tom's desk. The pile of unfinished documents remained untouched. Hours had passed. Nothing had been completed. At first, people assumed he was tired. Then they assumed he was distracted. Soon they realized something was seriously wrong. Tom Norrie never ignored work. Never. His reputation had been built on discipline. Efficiency. Reliability. Yet here he sat doing absolutely nothing. The unusual behavior quickly attracted attention. Before long, word reached Mr. Trumbull, one of the senior partners, one of the most powerful men in the company, and one of the individuals who expected complete dedication from everyone around him. Trumbull entered with confidence. He was accustomed to authority, accustomed to obedience, accustomed to people responding immediately when he spoke. The business world had rewarded him for decades. His methods had generated wealth. His decisions had built success. And because of that, he rarely encountered resistance. Certainly not from Tom. When Trumbull approached the desk, he expected a simple explanation. Perhaps illness. Perhaps stress. Perhaps a temporary distraction. What he encountered instead was something entirely unexpected. A man who had stopped playing the game. Tom remained seated. Calm. Relaxed. Almost amused. There was no anxiety in his expression. No fear. No urgency. It was as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Trumbull asked questions. Important questions. Questions regarding business matters that demanded immediate attention. Questions that would normally receive detailed responses. But Tom's answers were brief. Casual. Almost indifferent. The conversation quickly became uncomfortable. Not because Tom was angry. Anger would have made sense. Anger could be managed. Anger eventually burns itself out. What made the situation unsettling was Tom's complete lack of concern. He simply didn't care anymore. And that frightened people. Because society knows how to deal with anger. It knows how to deal with conflict. But it doesn't know how to deal with someone who has stopped believing in the entire system. As the discussion continued, Trumbull became increasingly frustrated. He reminded Tom of his responsibilities. His obligations. His position within the company. Everything he stood to lose. The argument was logical. Practical. Reasonable. And under normal circumstances it would have worked. But logic only influences people when they still accept the assumptions behind it. Tom no longer did. The promises that once motivated him had lost their power. More money. He already had enough. More status. He no longer cared. More success. Success itself had become questionable. One by one, every incentive collapsed. And then something remarkable happened. Tom reached for a cigar. Today, this might seem insignificant. But in that office, at that moment, it was an act of rebellion. Smoking was forbidden. Rules were rules. Everyone followed them. Everyone accepted them. Without hesitation, Tom lit the cigar. The smoke drifted upward, slowly filling the air. Several employees stared in disbelief. The act itself wasn't important. The symbolism was. For years Tom had followed every rule. Now he was openly ignoring them. Not because he wanted attention. Not because he wanted to provoke anyone. But because the fear that once controlled him was disappearing. This is one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience. Most people spend their lives governed by invisible fears. Fear of failure. Fear of criticism. Fear of rejection. Fear of uncertainty. Fear keeps people obedient. Fear keeps people trapped. Fear convinces people to remain where they no longer belong. And for the first time, Tom was beginning to escape. The conversation with Trumbull continued. The pressure intensified. Warnings were given. Consequences were implied. Yet none of it produced the desired effect. Tom remained calm. The more others became agitated, the calmer he appeared. This often happens when someone finally reaches a decision. The struggle ends. The uncertainty disappears. The fear dissolves. And what remains is clarity. Tom had spent years debating with himself. Years questioning. Years suppressing doubts. Now the decision was made. His life would change. The only question was when. The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. As the discussion reached its breaking point, Tom understood something important. There would never be a perfect moment to leave. There would always be another project. Another responsibility. Another reason to stay. The future would always offer new excuses. If he didn't leave now, he might never leave. Many people experience similar moments. They wait for ideal circumstances. The perfect opportunity. The perfect timing. The perfect plan. But perfect conditions rarely exist. Change usually requires a leap into uncertainty. And uncertainty terrifies most people. Tom understood this. Yet he also understood something else. Remaining terrified him even more. Imagine realizing that the next 10 years of your life will look exactly like the previous 10. Imagine seeing your future clearly enough to know nothing will change. For Tom, that vision was unbearable. He looked around the office one final time. The desks. The papers. The employees. The endless machinery of business. For years this world had defined him. Now it felt strangely small. He realized he was looking at a chapter of his life that had already ended. The physical surroundings remained. But emotionally, he had already left. And then he stood up. The moment was simple. Almost ordinary. No dramatic speech. No grand announcement. No emotional farewell. He simply rose from his chair. Gathered himself. And prepared to walk away. Sometimes the most important decisions in life happen quietly. The world expects dramatic transformations. But real transformation often occurs in silence. One choice. One step. One moment of courage. That is all it takes. As Tom moved toward the exit, people watched. Some were confused. Some were shocked. Some were concerned. And some felt something they would never admit. Envy. Because deep down, many of them dreamed of doing the same thing. Many people live lives they did not choose. They follow paths designed by others. They fulfill expectations created by society. They postpone dreams for practical reasons. And eventually they convince themselves that freedom is impossible. Then someone like Tom appears. Someone who refuses. Someone who walks away. Someone who chooses uncertainty over captivity. And suddenly everyone is forced to confront a difficult question. If he can leave, why can't I? That question makes people uncomfortable. Because the answer often has nothing to do with circumstances. It has everything to do with courage. Tom stepped through the doorway. And with that single act, 8 years of routine came to an end. He did not know what would happen next. He had no detailed plan. No guaranteed future. No certainty. Only freedom. For many people, that would seem terrifying. For Tom, it felt exhilarating. As he entered the fresh spring air outside, he experienced something he had not felt in years. Possibility. The world suddenly seemed larger. Brighter. More alive. The city around him had not changed. Yet everything looked different. Because he was seeing it through new eyes. The eyes of a man who had reclaimed ownership of his life. The rebellion was complete. The prison door had opened. And Tom Norrie had walked through it. But freedom creates new challenges. Leaving an old life is difficult. Building a new one is even harder. And in the chapters ahead, Tom will discover that escaping a prison is only the beginning. The real challenge is deciding what comes next. And that journey is about to begin. The cost of money. Tom Norrie was free. At least, that is what it appeared to be. He had walked away from the office. He had abandoned the routine that had controlled him for 8 long years. He no longer had to answer to supervisors. He no longer had to stare at endless stacks of paperwork. He no longer had to spend his days trapped inside a world he hated. Yet freedom has a strange way of exposing truths. When the noise disappears, people are finally forced to listen to themselves. And for Tom, that silence revealed something profound. The problem had never been the office alone. The problem was the philosophy that had guided his life. For years, he had believed a simple equation. Work hard. Earn money. Become successful. Then happiness will follow. It sounded reasonable. Millions of people believed it. Entire societies were built upon it. But now Tom was beginning to wonder whether that equation was incomplete. Or perhaps entirely wrong. As he walked through the city streets, he found himself observing people differently. Men hurried toward offices carrying briefcases. Workers rushed to factories. Shopkeepers opened stores. Streetcars carried crowds from one responsibility to another. Everywhere he looked, people seemed busy. Urgent. Focused. Driven. But a question entered his mind. How many of them were actually happy? Not comfortable. Not secure. Not successful. Happy. The more he thought about it, the harder the question became. Because happiness and success were not always the same thing. Society often treated them as identical. Yet Tom had met many successful people who were miserable. And many ordinary people who seemed genuinely content. Why was that? What was the difference? For years, Tom had assumed money was the answer. Money solved problems. Money created opportunities. Money provided security. Money commanded respect. Money mattered. Of course it mattered. Tom was not foolish enough to deny that. Poverty created hardships. Financial struggle brought stress. Nobody enjoyed uncertainty. But the question wasn't whether money had value. The question was whether money deserved to become the center of life. And that question haunted him. As he reflected on his own journey, memories began surfacing. Memories from before business had consumed him. He remembered being a student. He remembered afternoons spent reading simply because he loved learning. Not because it would help his career. Not because it would increase profits. But because curiosity itself brought joy. He remembered dreams of travel. He wanted to see distant cities. Different cultures. Foreign landscapes. He imagined adventures stretching across continents. The world seemed enormous back then. Full of mystery. Full of possibility. Full of wonder. But somehow those dreams had disappeared. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Slowly. Quietly. One compromise at a time. One postponement at a time. One practical decision at a time. That is how most dreams die. Not through catastrophe. Through delay. People tell themselves they will pursue their dreams later. After they earn enough money. After they achieve stability. After they finish their responsibilities. After the timing improves. But later keeps moving. Years pass. Then decades. Eventually people discover that later never arrived. Tom suddenly realized that this had happened to him. The young man who dreamed of adventure had become a businessman obsessed with schedules and accounts. The transformation had been gradual. So gradual he barely noticed it happening. Yet now, looking backward, the difference felt enormous. He wasn't the person he intended to become. And that realization hurt. Because it forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. The business had not stolen his dreams. He had traded them. Willingly. In exchange for security. In exchange for approval. In exchange for money. The exchange had seemed reasonable at the time. Now he wasn't so sure. Imagine standing before two doors. Behind one door lies certainty. A predictable income. Social respect. A stable future. Behind the other door lies uncertainty. Adventure. Growth. Possibility. Most people choose certainty. Tom had chosen certainty. And perhaps he would have continued choosing it forever if something inside him had not finally rebelled. As he continued reflecting, another realization emerged. Money has a unique power over human beings. It promises freedom. Yet often creates dependence. People spend their lives pursuing wealth because they believe wealth will eventually liberate them. But during the pursuit, they sacrifice the very freedom they seek. They work longer hours. Accept greater responsibilities. Take on additional obligations. Gradually, they become servants to the things they own. The larger the house, the larger the expenses. The greater the income, the greater the pressure. The higher the status, the stronger the expectations. What begins as a pursuit of freedom can become a trap. Tom understood this now. The irony was impossible to ignore. The money he earned was supposed to improve life. Instead, earning money had become his life. Everything revolved around it. Every decision. Every plan. Every sacrifice. The purpose had become the process. And somewhere along the way, he forgot why he started. Many people experience this without realizing it. They become experts at making a living but never learn how to live. They spend decades preparing for a future they never actually enjoy. Always working. Always striving. Always postponing happiness. Tom had become one of those people. And now he could finally see it. The insight was painful. But it was also liberating. Because once you recognize a mistake, you gain the power to correct it. For the first time in years, Tom began asking a different question. Not, how can I earn more money? But, what kind of life do I actually want? The difference was enormous. One question focused on accumulation. The other focused on meaning. And meaning was something Tom desperately needed. As the days passed, he continued examining his beliefs. Some survived. Others collapsed completely. He still believed in hard work. But he no longer believed work should consume life. He still believed money mattered. But he no longer believed money defined success. He still believed responsibility was important. But he no longer believed responsibility required self-sacrifice. These distinctions changed everything. For years, Tom had viewed life through a narrow lens. Career first. Everything else second. Now the lens widened. He began noticing things he had ignored. The beauty of an ordinary afternoon. The pleasure of an unhurried conversation. The satisfaction of reading without purpose. The simple joy of having nowhere urgent to be. These experiences seemed small. Yet they felt richer than many of the achievements he once celebrated. Why? Because they belonged to him. Not to his employer. Not to society. Not to expectations. To him. And perhaps that was the heart of the issue. Money can purchase many things. But it cannot purchase ownership of your life. Only your choices can do that. The more Tom reflected, the more convinced he became that modern society misunderstood wealth. Most people measured wealth in dollars. Bank accounts. Investments. Property. But perhaps true wealth should be measured differently. How much control do you have over your time? How much freedom do you have over your decisions? How much meaning exists in your daily life? These questions seemed far more important. Because eventually everyone runs out of time. No amount of money can change that. The richest person in the world receives the same 24 hours as everyone else. And once those hours are gone, they are gone forever. This realization struck Tom deeply. He thought about the years already lost. 8 years. Thousands of days. Millions of moments. How many had been sacrificed to goals he no longer valued? The number was impossible to calculate. Yet dwelling on regret served no purpose. The past could not be changed. Only the future remained open. And for the first time in years, the future felt exciting. Not because he had a perfect plan. Not because success was guaranteed. But because possibility had returned. Possibility is one of life's greatest gifts. Children possess it naturally. They imagine countless futures. Countless adventures. Countless paths. Many adults lose it. Their lives become fixed. Predictable. Limited. Tom was rediscovering it. The world felt larger again. More mysterious. More alive. The same dreams that once seemed impossible began returning. Travel. Learning. Adventure. Growth. Freedom. Not as fantasies. As possibilities. And that changed everything. Because once a person sees another way of living, it becomes impossible to forget. The old life loses its power. The old assumptions lose their authority. The old fears lose their grip. Tom Norrie had spent years believing that wealth was the ultimate goal. Now he understood something far more important. Money is a tool. Not a purpose. A means. Not an end. And when people confuse the tool for the destination, they risk sacrificing their lives for something that was never meant to define them. This lesson would shape every decision Tom made moving forward. But new questions were beginning to emerge. Questions not about money. Questions about love. Questions about relationships. Questions about human connection. Because while Tom was learning how to redefine success, another person was about to enter his life. A person who would challenge him in ways money never could. A person named Janet Trumbull. And her arrival would transform everything once again. Janet Trumbull enters the story. Every great transformation begins with a question. But sometimes it begins with a person. For Tom Norrie, freedom had opened a door. He had escaped the life that once controlled him. He had challenged the assumptions that guided his career. He had begun searching for something deeper than money and success. Yet there was still a missing piece. A human being can spend years understanding the world and still know very little about themselves. Often it takes another person to reveal the truths we cannot see alone. That person was about to enter Tom's life. Her name was Janet Trumbull. And she was unlike anyone he had ever known. At first glance, Janet appeared ordinary enough. She was intelligent. Educated. Attractive. Confident. But beneath those qualities existed something far more unusual. She thought for herself. In a world where many people accepted traditions without question, Janet questioned everything. Social expectations. Marriage. Success. Love. Gender roles. Human behavior. Nothing escaped her examination. She possessed a rare quality. The courage to think independently. And independent thinkers often make others uncomfortable. Especially men accustomed to admiration. Tom had met many women before. Most conversations followed familiar patterns. Predictable questions. Predictable answers. Predictable outcomes. But Janet was different. Talking to her felt less like conversation and more like intellectual combat. She challenged assumptions. Questioned opinions. Refused easy answers. And strangely enough, Tom loved it. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely alive. Their early conversation stretched for hours. Topics shifted constantly. Literature. Politics. Society. Philosophy. The future. The purpose of life. Nothing seemed off limits. Tom discovered that Janet possessed an extraordinary mind. She didn't simply repeat what others believed. She examined ideas carefully. Accepted some. Rejected others. And formed conclusions of her own. That independence fascinated him. Because Tom himself was undergoing a similar transformation. For years he had followed expectations. Now he was learning to question them. Janet represented everything he was trying to become. Fearless. Authentic. Independent. Their connection deepened quickly. But not in the way Tom expected. Many relationships begin with attraction. Then slowly develop depth. This one worked differently. The intellectual connection came first. Respect came first. Curiosity came first. Only later did romantic feelings begin to emerge. And perhaps that is why the relationship felt so powerful. Tom wasn't merely attracted to Janet. He admired her. Admiration is different. Attraction can fade. Admiration often grows stronger. The more time he spent with her, the more fascinated he became. Yet Janet remained difficult to understand. One moment she seemed warm and open. The next she appeared distant and mysterious. She revealed herself carefully. Never completely. Never easily. Tom found this frustrating. But he also found it irresistible. Human beings are naturally drawn to mystery. We want to understand what we cannot fully explain. Janet became that mystery. And Tom wanted answers. As their friendship evolved, something interesting happened. Janet began challenging Tom directly. Not his opinions. His character. Most people praised Tom. After all, he was successful. Wealthy. Educated. Respectable. Society rewarded those qualities. Janet looked beyond them. She wasn't interested in his achievements. She wanted to know who he really was. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, during a conversation about life and ambition, Janet asked a question that caught Tom off guard. Why had he spent so many years doing work he disliked? The question sounded simple. Yet it struck at the heart of his recent transformation. Tom explained responsibility. Family expectations. Practical necessity. The same reasons he had repeated to himself for years. Janet listened carefully. Then challenged every one of them. Were those reasons truly valid? Or were they excuses? Was he fulfilling responsibility? Or avoiding risk? Was he honoring expectations? Or surrendering freedom? The questions unsettled him. Because deep down, he wasn't sure. Many people spend their lives constructing explanations for their choices. Then someone appears and asks a question powerful enough to dismantle everything. Janet possessed that ability. She had a gift for identifying hidden truths. Even when those truths were uncomfortable. Especially when they were uncomfortable. Tom found himself thinking about her constantly. Conversations replayed in his mind. Arguments lingered for days. Questions remained unanswered. She challenged him intellectually in ways no one else ever had. And challenge creates growth. Gradually, admiration transformed into affection. Affection transformed into love. At least on Tom's side. But Janet remained difficult to read. Sometimes she appeared interested. Sometimes she seemed completely indifferent. Her emotions remained carefully guarded. This uncertainty created tension. Tom preferred clarity. Business had trained him to seek clear answers. Clear objectives. Clear outcomes. Relationships, however, do not operate like business. Human emotions rarely follow predictable rules. And Janet especially refused predictability. That unpredictability forced Tom to develop patience. A quality he had never fully mastered. The relationship moved slowly. Not because there was no connection. But because Janet refused to rush. She understood something many people forget. Strong relationships require understanding. Not merely attraction. Not merely chemistry. Understanding. And understanding takes time. As months passed, Tom learned more about her worldview. She believed many social traditions deserved scrutiny. Particularly those involving relationships. She observed how people often confused love with ownership. Commitment with control. Marriage with obligation. These distinctions mattered deeply to her. She refused to accept conventional wisdom simply because it was conventional. If a tradition survived examination, she respected it. If it failed examination, she rejected it. Tom admired this consistency. Yet it also created challenges. Because Janet expected the same honesty from others that she demanded from herself. No shortcuts. No self-deception. No comfortable illusions. Tom soon discovered that meeting those standards was difficult. Especially when confronting aspects of himself he preferred to ignore. One evening, after a particularly intense discussion, he realized something surprising. Janet was helping him continue the journey he began when he left the business. The rebellion against the office had been external. The rebellion Janet inspired was internal. She forced him to examine his fears. His motivations. His assumptions. His weaknesses. And growth often begins exactly there. Not with confidence. With discomfort. The more deeply Tom fell in love, the more vulnerable he became. Vulnerability frightened him. Business success had created confidence. Relationships created uncertainty. No amount of intelligence could guarantee affection. No amount of money could guarantee understanding. No amount of effort could guarantee love. This reality humbled him. Perhaps for the first time in his life. Because love follows different rules. Rules that cannot be negotiated or controlled. And Janet understood those rules far better than he did. As their relationship deepened, Tom began imagining a future together. Not simply romance. Partnership. Companionship. A shared life. The possibility excited him. Yet uncertainty remained. Because Janet continued guarding part of herself. Not out of cruelty. Not out of manipulation. But because she believed emotional commitments deserved careful consideration. She would not offer her heart lightly. Nor would she accept someone else's without examination. This approach frustrated Tom. Yet he respected it. Because it reflected the same authenticity he admired from the beginning. Janet refused to pretend. Refused to perform. Refused to become someone else simply to satisfy expectations. And perhaps that was what attracted him most. She was genuine. In a world filled with performance and pretense, Janet Trumbull was real. The relationship continued evolving. Conversation by conversation. Challenge by challenge. Discovery by discovery. Neither of them realized it yet. But these early interactions were laying the foundation for conflicts that would emerge later. Because love alone does not solve everything. Sometimes love reveals problems that previously remained hidden. And Tom still carried unresolved questions. Questions about identity. Purpose. Fear. Courage. Questions Janet would eventually force him to confront. In many ways, their relationship was only beginning. The attraction was real. The connection was powerful. The possibilities seemed endless. Yet beneath the surface, deeper challenges waited. Challenges neither of them fully understood. Challenges that would test everything they believed about themselves. And as Tom's feelings continued growing stronger, he found himself moving toward a decision. A decision that would change both of their lives. Because before long, thoughts of friendship would no longer be enough. Admiration would no longer be enough. Love would demand something more. And that journey begins in the next chapter. The unusual courtship. The unusual courtship. Love stories usually begin with certainty. Two people meet. They are attracted to each other. They spend time together. And gradually, a relationship develops. At least, that's how most stories are told. But Tom Norrie and Janet Trumbull were not most people. Their relationship would never follow a predictable path. Because neither of them was interested in pretending. Neither of them was willing to settle for easy answers. And neither of them truly understood how much they were about to change each other's lives. By the time Tom realized he was in love, he had already spent countless hours thinking about Janet. Not simply admiring her beauty. Not simply enjoying her company. But wrestling with her ideas. Arguing with her opinions. Questioning his own beliefs because of conversations they had shared. He had met attractive women before. He had met intelligent women before. But Janet possessed something rare. She challenged him. And challenge creates fascination. Every conversation felt important. Every disagreement revealed something new. Every meeting left him thinking long after it ended. For a man who had spent years trapped in routine, Janet represented something exciting. Uncertainty. Mystery. Discovery. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Tom found himself imagining a future with her. The thought surprised him. Because for much of his life, relationships had occupied a secondary position. Business came first. Responsibilities came first. Success came first. Now those priorities were changing. The more freedom he discovered, the more important human connection became. And no connection felt more meaningful than the one he shared with Janet. Yet there was a problem. Tom understood his own feelings. He did not understand hers. Janet remained difficult to read. Some days she seemed deeply engaged. Warm. Attentive. Interested. Other days she appeared distant. Thoughtful. Almost unreachable. This uncertainty frustrated Tom. Business had trained him to seek clarity. Goals. Plans. Definite outcomes. Love offered none of those things. Love demanded patience. And patience was a skill Tom was still learning. The relationship continued growing. But it grew through conversation rather than romance. While many couples spent their time exchanging compliments, Tom and Janet exchanged ideas. They debated everything. The nature of happiness. The purpose of work. The meaning of success. The role of marriage. The expectations society placed upon individuals. Nothing was too large or too small for discussion. In many ways, these conversations became the foundation of their relationship. Each debate revealed character. Each disagreement exposed values. And values matter far more than attraction. Anyone can be charming for an evening. Very few people can reveal who they truly are. Janet revealed herself through ideas. Tom revealed himself through reactions. And together they built something deeper than ordinary romance. Still, the path remained complicated. One reason was Janet's attitude toward marriage. Unlike many women of her era, she refused to treat marriage as life's ultimate goal. She did not view it as an achievement. Nor did she view it as a requirement. To Janet, marriage was simply one possible choice among many. And if chosen, it should be chosen carefully. Very carefully. This perspective surprised Tom. Most of the women he had known viewed marriage differently. Society encouraged them to. From an early age, many were taught that happiness depended upon finding the right husband. Janet rejected that assumption. She believed happiness depended upon understanding oneself. Marriage could contribute to happiness. Or destroy it. The outcome depended entirely upon the people involved. Tom admired this independence. But it also made him nervous. Because winning Janet's affection would require more than conventional courtship. He could not impress her with money. She wasn't interested. He could not impress her with status. She wasn't impressed by titles. He could not rely upon social expectations. Janet ignored expectations whenever they conflicted with truth. For perhaps the first time in his life, Tom was forced to earn someone's respect entirely through character. And that process proved both exhilarating and terrifying. As their relationship deepened, Tom began noticing another aspect of Janet's personality. She possessed remarkable emotional honesty. Not emotional openness. Those are different things. Janet did not reveal everything she felt. In fact, she often remained guarded. But when she spoke truthfully. She refused manipulation. Refused games. Refused pretense. Many people say what others want to hear. Janet said what she believed. Even when it created tension. Even when it caused discomfort. Tom respected that quality immensely. Yet living with honesty is not always easy. Because honesty often exposes weaknesses. And Janet had an unusual talent for identifying weaknesses. Especially Tom's. During one conversation, she questioned his recent rebellion against the business world. At first, Tom assumed she admired his decision. After all, leaving the company required courage. Didn't it? Perhaps. But Janet saw another possibility. Had he left because he wanted freedom? Or because he was escaping responsibility? The question irritated him. Naturally. Nobody enjoys having their motives questioned. Especially when they have spent months convincing themselves they acted nobly. Yet the more Tom considered her words, the more uncertain he became. That was Janet's gift. She forced people beyond simple explanations. She refused easy narratives. Life was complicated. Human beings were complicated. And she expected honesty about both. These discussions gradually transformed Tom. Not immediately. Growth rarely happens immediately. But conversation by conversation, his understanding deepened. He became more self-aware. More reflective. More willing to confront uncomfortable truths. In many ways, Janet was becoming his teacher. Though she would probably have hated that description. Because Janet never claimed superior wisdom. She simply asked questions. Questions powerful enough to force deeper thinking. Meanwhile, Tom's feelings continued growing stronger. The admiration that began their relationship was evolving into love. Real love. Not fantasy. Not infatuation. But genuine affection rooted in respect and understanding. And as those feelings intensified, a new challenge emerged. Fear. Love always creates vulnerability. The more someone matters to us, the more we risk losing. Tom had spent years building confidence through achievement. Achievements were predictable. Relationships were not. No amount of intelligence guaranteed success. No amount of effort guaranteed reciprocation. No amount of sincerity guaranteed happiness. This uncertainty frightened him. And Janet sensed it. She often sensed things Tom preferred hiding. One evening, after a particularly thoughtful discussion, Janet made an observation that stayed with him for days. She suggested that many people seek relationships for the wrong reasons. Not because they genuinely understand another person. But because they fear loneliness. Not because they wish to share life. But because they want security. The comment struck Tom deeply. Because it forced another difficult question. Why did he love Janet? Was it truly love? Or was it dependency disguised as love? The distinction mattered enormously. Love seeks the good of another person. Dependency seeks comfort for oneself. Many relationships confuse the two. Janet refused to. And because she refused to, Tom could not avoid examining his own motives. The process was uncomfortable. Yet necessary. The strongest relationships are not built upon illusion. They are built upon truth. Even painful truth. As months passed, their bond strengthened. Not because they agreed on everything. Often they disagreed. Passionately. But disagreement never destroyed respect. In fact, it often deepened it. Both recognized that the other possessed intelligence and integrity. And integrity creates trust. Gradually, something remarkable happened. Tom began imagining not simply a future with Janet, but a better version of himself because of Janet. That realization mattered. Healthy love inspires growth. It encourages people to become more honest, more courageous, more authentic. Janet inspired all three. Yet uncertainty remained. Neither of them had fully expressed what the future might hold. Neither had defined the relationship. Neither had discussed marriage seriously. At least not yet. The possibility lingered in the background, growing stronger with each passing month. And Tom found himself approaching an important decision. A decision that would require more courage than leaving the business. Because walking away from a company risked money. Opening his heart risked everything else. The moment was approaching. Soon admiration would need words. Soon affection would require action. Soon Tom Norrie would ask a question capable of changing both their lives forever. And Janet's answer would reveal just how different this love story truly was. Because unlike ordinary romances, nothing about their journey would be simple. The most important chapter was still ahead. The chapter where love would finally confront commitment. And where two intelligent, independent people would discover whether admiration alone was enough to build a future together. The proposal and Janet's unexpected response. There comes a moment in every love story when thoughts must become words. A moment when feelings can no longer remain hidden. A moment when uncertainty becomes unbearable. For Tom Norrie, that moment had arrived. For months, perhaps even longer, his feelings for Janet Trumbull had been growing. What began as admiration had evolved into affection. What began as curiosity had evolved into love. And now he found himself standing at a crossroads. He could continue pretending that friendship was enough. Or he could risk everything. The choice seemed obvious. Yet obvious choices are not always easy. Because love asks something difficult from us. It asks us to become vulnerable. It asks us to reveal parts of ourselves we normally protect. It asks us to accept uncertainty. And uncertainty frightened Tom more than he cared to admit. Leaving the business had required courage. But this felt different. The business could reject his ideas. Janet could reject him. There is a profound difference between losing an opportunity and losing a dream. And Janet had become a dream. Not an unrealistic fantasy. Not an idealized image. A real dream built upon genuine understanding. Tom admired her intelligence. Respected her independence. Valued her honesty. And increasingly, he could not imagine a future that did not include her. Yet one question continued haunting him. Did she feel the same way? The evidence seemed encouraging. Their conversations lasted for hours. Their friendship continued deepening. Their connection felt undeniable. But Janet was not easy to read. She guarded her emotions carefully. Not because she was cold. Not because she lacked feeling. But because she took emotions seriously. To Janet, love was not a game. Not entertainment. Not a social ritual. It was one of life's most important decisions. And important decisions deserved careful thought. That seriousness made Tom both admire and fear her. Because it meant she would never offer an easy answer. Eventually, he realized there was no point waiting. No perfect moment would arrive. No magical certainty would appear. The only path forward was honesty. And so, one day, he made his decision. He would tell Janet how he felt. He would ask her to share a future with him. Whatever happened afterward, at least he would know the truth. The day itself seemed ordinary. The sky stretched peacefully overhead. The world moved through its routines. People hurried through streets. Shops opened and closed. Life continued as usual. Yet for Tom, everything felt different. Because he knew a single conversation might alter the course of his entire life. When he met Janet, he quickly realized that all his carefully prepared words had disappeared. This often happens when something truly matters. The speeches we rehearse vanish. The plans collapse. And only sincerity remains. Perhaps that is for the best. The most important truths rarely sound polished. They sound honest. Tom spoke from the heart. He told Janet what she had come to mean to him. He described the impact she had on his life. The ways she challenged him. Inspired him. Helped him understand himself more clearly. He explained that his feelings had grown beyond friendship. And finally, he asked the question that had occupied his thoughts for months. Would she consider building a life with him? Would she marry him? For a moment, silence filled the space between them. And in that silence, Tom experienced every emotion imaginable. Hope. Fear. Excitement. Anxiety. Anticipation. The human mind moves quickly during moments of uncertainty. Entire futures can appear and disappear within seconds. Tom waited. And Janet thought. That was the first surprise. Many people would respond immediately. Janet did not. Because she never treated important questions casually. She respected them too much. Eventually, she spoke. And her response was not what Tom expected. She did not say yes. But she did not say no. Instead, she asked questions. Questions about love. Questions about marriage. Questions about what each of them truly wanted. At first, Tom felt confused. Wasn't the situation simple? Two people cared for each other. Why complicate it? But Janet saw things differently. To her, affection alone was not enough. Love mattered. Of course it mattered. But marriage involved more than love. It involved values, expectations, goals, identity, the ability to grow together rather than apart. And before making such a commitment, she wanted understanding. Real understanding. Not assumptions. Not romantic fantasies. Understanding. This response surprised Tom. Part of him had expected an emotional answer. Instead, Janet approached the subject with thoughtfulness and caution. Yet the more he listened, the more he realized she wasn't rejecting him. She was respecting the decision. There is an important difference. Many people rush into commitments because they fear losing opportunities. Janet refused to let fear make decisions for her. She wanted clarity. And clarity requires patience. As their discussion continued, Janet revealed concerns that Tom had never fully considered. How many marriages were built upon illusion? How many people claimed to know each other while understanding very little? How many relationships collapsed because neither person examined their expectations beforehand? These questions fascinated her. And honestly, they fascinated Tom as well. Because he had witnessed unhappy marriages. Relationships built upon convenience rather than compatibility. Partnerships that survived legally while dying emotionally. Janet wanted something better. She believed marriage should strengthen freedom rather than destroy it. Too often, she argued, people treated marriage like ownership. One person attempting to control another. One life absorbing another. One identity disappearing inside a relationship. She rejected that model completely. To Janet, love should not reduce individuality. It should support it. The strongest partnerships consisted of two complete people choosing to share life. Not two incomplete people seeking rescue. This idea deeply impressed Tom. Because it reflected everything he admired about her. Strength. Independence. Integrity. And yet, it also challenged him. Because he began questioning his own motives. Why did he want marriage? Was it truly about partnership? Or was part of him seeking certainty? Security? Possession? The questions were uncomfortable. But Janet had always excelled at asking uncomfortable questions. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. Instead of becoming discouraged, Tom found himself respecting her even more. Many people would have accepted his proposal immediately. Especially given his social standing and financial stability. Janet was different. She valued truth more than convenience. And that quality made her extraordinary. For the first time, Tom understood that winning Janet's heart would require more than love. It would require growth. He would need to become the kind of person capable of sharing life with someone as independent as Janet. Not controlling her. Not convincing her. Not rescuing her. Understanding her. And perhaps understanding himself as well. Their conversation lasted far longer than either expected. By the end, no final answer had emerged. No engagement. No rejection. Only deeper questions. Yet strangely, Tom left feeling hopeful. Because beneath Janet's caution existed genuine affection. He could feel it. The challenge was not whether she cared. The challenge was whether they truly understood what building a life together would require. That distinction mattered enormously. Many relationships fail because people focus on feelings while ignoring reality. Janet insisted on facing reality directly. And reality is often complicated. Love alone does not eliminate differences. Love alone does not solve problems. Love creates opportunity. What people do with that opportunity determines everything. As weeks passed, Tom reflected constantly on their conversation. Certain parts frustrated him. Others inspired him. But all of it forced growth. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was learning that commitment involves more than desire. It involves responsibility, self-awareness, honesty, patience. The lessons were not easy. Yet they were valuable. Because Janet was teaching him something he desperately needed to learn. A meaningful relationship cannot be built upon fantasy. It must be built upon truth. And truth requires courage. The courage to ask difficult questions. The courage to hear uncomfortable answers. The courage to examine oneself honestly. Tom was beginning that journey. But greater challenges still waited ahead. Because Janet's questions had exposed deeper issues. Issues involving fear, identity, purpose, and courage itself. Questions Tom had not fully answered. Questions he could no longer avoid. Soon Janet would confront him with a truth so direct, so uncomfortable, that it would shake the foundation of everything he believed about himself. And when that moment arrived, Tom would face the most difficult challenge of his life. Not winning Janet's love. Winning his own respect. Because the next chapter is not really about romance. It is about self-discovery. It is about confronting weakness. And it is about learning that the greatest obstacles often exist inside ourselves. The journey was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning. Janet's brutal honesty. There are moments in life when we encounter a truth so uncomfortable that our first instinct is to reject it. Not because it is false. But because it is true. Painfully true. For Tom Norrie, that moment arrived through a conversation with Janet Trumbull. Until now, their relationship had been built upon admiration, intellectual debate, and growing affection. Tom loved Janet. And he believed she loved him as well. The future seemed possible. Perhaps even likely. Yet beneath the surface, something remained unresolved. Something Janet could see clearly. And something Tom had spent years avoiding. His fear. Not fear in the ordinary sense. Not fear of physical danger. Not fear of public embarrassment. A deeper fear. A fear that shaped the way he lived. The way he made decisions. The way he understood himself. And Janet was no longer willing to ignore it. By this point in their relationship, she knew Tom well. Better than most people. Perhaps better than he knew himself. She had listened to his stories. Observed his choices. Watched him struggle through periods of uncertainty. And she had reached a conclusion. A conclusion Tom was not prepared to hear. The conversation began innocently enough. Like many of their discussions, it started with ideas. Questions about life. Questions about ambition. Questions about purpose. But gradually, the focus shifted. The topic became personal. Very personal. Janet began examining Tom's recent transformation. His departure from the business world. His search for meaning. His growing dissatisfaction with conventional success. At first, Tom assumed she admired these changes. After all, they seemed courageous. Didn't they? Leaving security behind. Rejecting expectations. Choosing freedom over comfort. Most people would describe those actions as brave. Janet disagreed. Or at least, she partially disagreed. And what she said next shocked him. She suggested that some of his choices might not have been acts of courage. They might have been acts of fear. The statement hit Tom like a physical blow. Fear. How could she call him fearful? Hadn't he walked away from a successful career? Hadn't he challenged society's expectations? Hadn't he risked uncertainty in pursuit of freedom? Surely those were signs of courage. Janet listened patiently. Then she explained. Courage is not simply leaving something behind. Sometimes leaving is easier than staying. Sometimes rebellion is easier than responsibility. Sometimes escape disguises itself as freedom. The distinction mattered. And Janet believed Tom had never fully examined it. At first, he resisted her argument. Naturally. Most people defend themselves when criticized. Especially when the criticism strikes close to home. Tom offered explanations. Reasons. Justifications. Yet Janet remained unconvinced. She continued asking questions. Questions that became increasingly difficult to answer. Why had he remained in the business so long if he hated it? Why had it taken 8 years to act? What exactly had he been afraid of? Failure? Disapproval? Uncertainty? The questions continued. And with each one, Tom became more uncomfortable. Because deep inside, he knew there was some truth in what she was saying. For years he had blamed external circumstances. The business. Family expectations. Social pressure. But perhaps those explanations were incomplete. Perhaps the real obstacle had been internal. Perhaps he had been afraid. Afraid to disappoint others. Afraid to make mistakes. Afraid to choose a path without guarantees. Afraid to trust himself. The realization was painful. Yet Janet was not finished. In fact, she was only beginning. She pointed out a pattern she had noticed. Whenever life presented uncertainty, Tom searched for security. Whenever risk appeared, he hesitated. Whenever difficult choices emerged, he looked for reassurance. These behaviors were understandable. Most people behave the same way. But Janet expected more from him. Because she believed he was capable of more. That is one of the strange qualities of genuine love. Real love does not simply accept people as they are. It challenges them to become better. Not through control. Not through manipulation. But through honesty. And Janet was being brutally honest. The conversation grew increasingly intense. At times, Tom felt angry. At times, defensive. At times, embarrassed. Yet beneath those emotions existed something else. Recognition. Because every criticism touched a truth he had secretly suspected. A truth he had never fully acknowledged. For years, he had considered himself independent. Yet many of his choices had been shaped by the opinions of others. For years, he had considered himself ambitious. Yet ambition sometimes concealed insecurity. For years, he had considered himself courageous. Yet courage was not something a person earned once. It had to be practiced repeatedly. And perhaps he had stopped practicing. Janet's words forced him to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if leaving the business was only the beginning? What if the deeper challenge remained unfinished? What if freedom required more than changing circumstances? What if it required changing himself? That idea haunted him. Because external change is relatively simple. People can change jobs. Move cities. End relationships. Start new projects. But internal change is different. Internal change demands honesty. And honesty is difficult. Especially when it reveals flaws we would rather ignore. The discussion eventually shifted toward their relationship. And here Janet became even more direct. She asked whether Tom truly understood what partnership required. Not romance. Not attraction. Partnership. Could he share life with someone as independent as she was? Could he accept disagreement without feeling threatened? Could he love someone without trying to control outcomes? Could he embrace uncertainty rather than constantly seeking guarantees? The questions were challenging. Because they touched areas where Tom still struggled. He wanted certainty. Most people do. He wanted reassurance. Most people do. He wanted confidence about the future. Most people do. Yet Janet believed maturity required something different. The ability to move forward without certainty. The ability to act despite fear. The ability to trust life even when outcomes remained unknown. This philosophy fascinated Tom. And terrified him. Because it demanded a level of courage he wasn't sure he possessed. The conversation lasted for hours. Neither person raised their voice. Neither person became cruel. Yet the emotional intensity was enormous. By the end, Tom felt exhausted. Not because they had argued. Because he had been forced to confront himself. And self-confrontation is one of life's most difficult experiences. When the discussion finally ended, he walked home alone. His mind replayed every word. Every criticism. Every question. Every uncomfortable truth. Part of him wanted to dismiss Janet's observations. Part of him wanted to prove her wrong. But another part recognized something important. She wasn't attacking him. She was challenging him. There is a difference. An attack seeks to diminish. A challenge seeks to strengthen. And Janet wanted him to become stronger. Stronger emotionally. Stronger intellectually. Stronger spiritually. The realization changed everything. For perhaps the first time, Tom understood why their relationship mattered so much. It wasn't merely because he loved her. It was because she refused to let him settle. Many people surround themselves with comfort. People who agree. People who praise. People who avoid difficult conversations. Janet did the opposite. She demanded growth. And growth always requires discomfort. Over the following days, Tom reflected deeply. The questions refused to disappear. He examined memories from his past. Moments of hesitation. Moments of fear. Moments when he chose safety over possibility. The pattern became increasingly visible. Janet had been right. Not entirely. But enough. Enough to force change. Enough to demand action. Enough to transform the way he viewed himself. And that transformation marked a turning point. Because recognizing weakness is not failure. Ignoring weakness is failure. Recognizing weakness creates opportunity. The opportunity to improve. To evolve. To grow. Tom was finally beginning that process. Slowly. Painfully. Honestly. Yet another challenge remained. Understanding fear is one thing. Overcoming it is another. And soon life would provide an opportunity to test everything Janet had taught him. An opportunity that would reveal whether he had truly changed. Or merely understood the need for change. Because knowledge alone is never enough. Eventually, life demands action. Eventually, every lesson must be tested. And Tom Norrie's greatest test was approaching. A test involving courage. Identity. Love. And the future he hoped to build. The next chapter would reveal whether he was ready. Whether he could become the man Janet believed he could be. Or whether fear would once again control his life. Because the battle was no longer against society. No longer against business. No longer against expectations. The battle was within. And those are always the hardest battles to win. The battle within, Tom's identity crisis. Sometimes the most difficult question in life is also the simplest. Who are you? At first, the answer seems obvious. People introduce themselves every day. They mention their names. Their occupations. Their accomplishments. Their backgrounds. Their titles. But what happens when all those things are stripped away? What remains? That was the question Tom Norrie could no longer avoid. For most of his adult life, his identity had been clear. He was a businessman. A partner. A successful young professional. A respected member of society. Those labels had defined him. Not completely. But enough. They gave structure to his life. Direction. Purpose. Or at least the appearance of purpose. Now those labels were disappearing. The business was gone. The routine was gone. The certainty was gone. And without them, something unexpected happened. Tom no longer knew exactly who he was. At first, this realization frightened him. Human beings depend upon identity. We build stories about ourselves. Stories that explain our place in the world. Stories that help us understand our choices. Stories that provide stability. Without those stories, life can feel confusing. Even chaotic. Tom was entering that chaos. And it began shortly after his conversation with Janet. Her criticism continued echoing through his mind. Particularly one idea. The possibility that he had spent years living according to expectations rather than convictions. The possibility that much of his identity had been borrowed. Borrowed from family. Borrowed from society. Borrowed from tradition. If that was true, then an uncomfortable question followed. Who was Tom Norrie beneath all of that? The answer wasn't obvious. And that uncertainty became the center of his struggle. Every morning he found himself thinking about it. While walking through the city. While sitting alone with a book. While reflecting on the future. The question followed him everywhere. Who am I? Not what do I do? Not what do I own? Not what do people think of me? Who am I? The more seriously he examined the question, the more difficult it became. Because for years he had confused identity with achievement. Many people do. Society encourages it. Children are praised for accomplishments. Adults are judged by careers. Status becomes a substitute for self-understanding. The process feels natural. Until one day the achievements no longer satisfy. Then the deeper questions emerge. Tom had reached that stage. The achievements remained. But their meaning had faded. The business no longer defined success. Money no longer defined worth. Status no longer defined value. Without those measurements, he needed a new foundation. And finding that foundation would become one of the greatest challenges of his life. At first, he tried approaching the problem logically. He analyzed his past. Examined his decisions. Reviewed his motivations. Yet logic alone provided limited answers. Because identity is not simply an intellectual concept. It is emotional. Psychological. Spiritual. A person cannot discover themselves through analysis alone. They must experience life differently. Tom was beginning to understand this. One afternoon, while wandering through the city without any particular destination, he noticed something strange. For the first time in years, he had nowhere he needed to be. No meetings. No deadlines. No obligations. No urgent responsibilities. Freedom. The very thing he had desired. Yet instead of feeling joyful, he felt uncomfortable. Why? Because freedom creates responsibility. When nobody controls your schedule, you must decide what matters. When nobody defines your purpose, you must create your own. When nobody tells you who to be, you must discover it yourself. Those responsibilities can feel overwhelming. Tom suddenly realized why so many people avoid freedom. Freedom sounds wonderful in theory. In practice, it demands courage. Because freedom eliminates excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances. You can no longer blame expectations. You can no longer blame obligations. The choices become yours. Entirely yours. And that reality is both empowering and frightening. For years, Tom believed the business prevented him from living authentically. Now he faced a new possibility. Perhaps authentic living required more than escaping the business. Perhaps it required creating a meaningful life afterward. That challenge proved far more difficult. Many people know what they dislike. Far fewer know what they truly want. Tom was discovering the difference. As the weeks passed, he experimented with new experiences. He read more widely. Spent time outdoors. Explored interests he had neglected for years. Met different kinds of people. Gradually, pieces of himself began returning. The curiosity he once possessed. The love of learning. The fascination with ideas. The excitement of discovery. These qualities had never disappeared completely. They had simply been buried beneath years of routine. Now they were resurfacing. And with them came a growing sense of possibility. Yet uncertainty remained. Because rediscovering interests is not the same as discovering purpose. Purpose operates at a deeper level. Purpose answers the question. Why am I here? What should I do with my life? Those questions haunted Tom. And unfortunately, they offered no easy answers. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had changed, he realized something important. For years he had pursued success because he believed success would provide identity. If he became wealthy enough, accomplished enough, respected enough, then he would know who he was. Now he understood the mistake. Identity does not emerge from achievement. Achievement emerges from identity. People must understand themselves first. Only then can they pursue goals that genuinely matter. The realization felt profound. And somewhat painful. Because it suggested that much of his previous life had been built backward. He had spent years constructing a future without fully understanding the person living it. No wonder fulfillment remained elusive. No wonder success felt incomplete. No wonder Janet's questions affected him so deeply. She had recognized the problem before he did. She understood that external changes alone were insufficient. Real transformation required internal clarity. And internal clarity required honesty. Tom was becoming more honest every day. Not only with Janet. With himself. Perhaps for the first time. He began acknowledging fears he once denied. Insecurities he once ignored. Motivations he once misunderstood. The process was uncomfortable. But it was also liberating. Because truth, however painful, creates freedom. Lies create prisons. And Tom had spent enough time inside prisons. Gradually, his perspective changed. Instead of asking, "What career should I pursue?" he asked, "What kind of person do I want to become?" Instead of asking, "How can I be successful?" he asked, "What does success actually mean?" Instead of asking, "What will people think?" he asked, "What do I believe?" These shifts may seem small. Yet they transformed everything. Because the quality of our questions determines the quality of our lives. Better questions lead to better answers. And Tom was finally asking better questions. Still, growth rarely occurs in a straight line. Some days he felt confident. Other days he felt lost. Some mornings brought clarity. Other mornings brought confusion. Progress came in waves. Not certainty. This frustrated him. Business had conditioned him to expect measurable results. Life rarely operates that way. Personal growth is messy, complicated, unpredictable. Janet understood this. Tom was still learning. During one of their conversations, she offered an observation that stayed with him. She suggested that identity is not something we discover once. It is something we create continuously. Every decision contributes. Every action matters. Every choice shapes character. The idea fascinated him, because it transformed identity from a fixed destination into an ongoing process. Perhaps nobody fully knows themselves. Perhaps everyone is constantly becoming. The thought felt strangely comforting. It removed the pressure of finding a perfect answer. Instead, it encouraged movement, growth, exploration, life. And that realization marked a turning point. For the first time, Tom stopped searching for certainty. Instead, he began embracing possibility. The difference was subtle, yet powerful. Certainty seeks guarantees. Possibility seeks opportunity. Certainty demands control. Possibility welcomes discovery. Tom had spent years chasing certainty. Now he was learning something far more valuable. How to live without it. This lesson would prove essential, because the challenges ahead offered no guarantees. Not in love. Not in purpose. Not in life. The future remained uncertain. But uncertainty no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like freedom. And perhaps that was the greatest transformation of all. The businessman who once feared risk was beginning to trust himself. The young man who once lived according to expectations was beginning to define his own path. The person who once measured life through money was beginning to measure it through meaning. The journey was far from complete. Yet something fundamental had changed. Tom was no longer asking life to provide him with an identity. He was beginning to create one. And as that new identity emerged, so did a deeper understanding of love. Because identity and relationships are connected. To truly love another person, one must first understand oneself. Janet knew this. Tom was finally learning it. And soon their relationship would face its most important challenge yet. A challenge that would test everything they had discovered about freedom, courage, honesty, and commitment. Because understanding yourself is only the first step. The next step is sharing that self with another person. And that is where the real story begins. Love, freedom, and commitment. For most of human history, people have viewed love and freedom as opposites. The common belief is simple. If you want complete freedom, you must avoid commitment. If you want commitment, you must sacrifice freedom. According to this way of thinking, you can have one or the other. But never both. Tom Norrie and Janet Trumbull were beginning to question that assumption. And the answer they discovered would change the course of their relationship forever. By now, both of them had spent months exploring difficult questions. Questions about work. Questions about identity. Questions about courage. Questions about purpose. Their relationship was unlike anything either had experienced before. Most romances focus on emotions. Their romance focused on understanding. Every conversation seemed to peel away another layer of illusion. Every disagreement revealed a deeper truth. Every challenge forced growth. And now they stood before perhaps the most important question of all. What happens when love becomes serious? What happens when two people begin imagining a future together? Can they remain true to themselves? Or must one person eventually surrender? This question mattered deeply to Janet. More deeply than Tom initially realized. Because Janet had spent years observing relationships around her. And she didn't like what she saw. She saw women abandoning their ambitions after marriage. She saw men becoming trapped by expectations they never chose. She saw couples who loved each other gradually transforming into strangers. She saw people sacrificing individuality in exchange for stability. And she refused to let that happen to her. Not under any circumstances. To many people, Janet's attitude seemed unusual. Some even considered it selfish. But Janet disagreed. She believed the opposite was true. She believed that losing yourself inside a relationship eventually damages both people. Because love cannot flourish when authenticity disappears. A person pretending to be someone else cannot build genuine intimacy. Only truth can do that. Tom understood this intellectually. But emotionally, the lesson was more complicated. Like many people, he carried hidden assumptions about relationships. Assumptions absorbed from family. From culture. From society. Ideas he had never consciously examined. For example, he often imagined commitment as certainty. A guarantee. A promise that everything would remain stable. Janet challenged that idea immediately. Nothing remains stable forever. People change. Circumstances change. Dreams change. The future changes. Trying to freeze life in place only creates disappointment. Instead, Janet argued, commitment should mean something different. Not a promise that nothing will change. A promise to face change together. That distinction fascinated Tom. Because it transformed commitment from a prison into a partnership. And partnerships operate differently. In a prison, one person loses freedom. In a partnership, both people gain strength. The difference is enormous. One evening, during a long walk together, their conversation turned toward marriage again. Not wedding ceremonies. Not social expectations. The deeper meaning beneath them. Why do people marry? The answers seemed obvious at first. Love. Companionship. Family. Security. Yet Janet pushed further. Why do people truly marry? Not what they claim. What motivates them underneath? The discussion became intense. Tom suggested that marriage often provides emotional security. Janet agreed. But then she asked a question. What if emotional security becomes dependency? The question stopped him. Because the line between love and dependency is not always obvious. Both involve attachment. Both involve care. Both involve connection. Yet they are fundamentally different. Love says, I want you to be happy. Dependency says, I need you to make me happy. Love celebrates freedom. Dependency fears it. Love strengthens individuality. Dependency weakens it. The more they explored the subject, the more important these distinctions became. Tom began recognizing examples everywhere. Relationships built upon fear of loneliness. Relationships built upon financial convenience. Relationships built upon social expectations. Many survived for years. Even decades. Yet survival and fulfillment are not the same thing. A relationship can survive while both people slowly lose themselves. Janet wanted something better. Tom did too. The challenge was figuring out how to achieve it. As the discussion continued, Janet revealed one of her deepest beliefs. She believed that healthy love requires two complete individuals. Not perfect individuals. Complete individuals. People who understand themselves. People who possess purpose beyond the relationship. People who choose each other freely rather than desperately. This idea resonated with Tom. Because it connected directly to his recent journey of self-discovery. For years he had searched for meaning through work. Now he was learning to create meaning internally. That growth made genuine partnership possible. Without it, relationships often become substitutes for identity. One person expects the other to provide purpose, to provide happiness, to provide fulfillment. An impossible burden. No human being can carry it successfully. Janet understood this. And she refused to place that burden on anyone, including Tom. Perhaps especially Tom. Because she cared about him. Real love demands honesty. And honesty sometimes sounds harsh. Over the following weeks, their conversations became even more personal. They discussed fears, dreams, expectations, future possibilities. Nothing remained hidden. At times the discussions felt uncomfortable. At times exhausting. Yet neither wanted superficial answers. They wanted truth. And truth requires effort. One afternoon, Tom made a surprising observation. The more freedom Janet demanded, the safer he felt around her. At first glance, that seemed contradictory. Most people associate safety with control. With certainty. With guarantees. Janet offered none of those things. Yet she offered something better. Authenticity. Tom never had to guess where he stood. Never had to interpret manipulation. Never had to navigate hidden agendas. What Janet believed, she expressed. What Janet felt, she eventually communicated. That honesty created trust. And trust creates a deeper form of security than control ever can. Gradually, Tom's understanding of love began changing. He stopped viewing commitment as ownership. Stopped viewing relationships as guarantees. Stopped viewing marriage as an escape from uncertainty. Instead, he began seeing love as a shared journey. A decision renewed repeatedly. A partnership between equals. A commitment to growth. This shift transformed everything. Because it aligned perfectly with the lessons he had learned about freedom. True freedom does not mean isolation. It does not mean avoiding responsibility. It does not mean living without attachment. True freedom means choosing your responsibilities consciously. Choosing your commitments intentionally. Choosing your relationships willingly. That kind of freedom is not weakened by love. It is strengthened by it. Janet had understood this long before Tom. Now he was beginning to understand it too. And with that understanding came a new level of maturity. For the first time, he stopped asking, "How can I keep Janet?" And started asking, "How can we build something meaningful together?" The difference changed everything. Because people are not possessions. Love is not ownership. Partnership is not control. These truths sound simple. Yet many people spend entire lives learning them. Tom was fortunate. He was learning them now. And he was learning them from someone extraordinary. As their relationship continued evolving, a quiet confidence began emerging. Not certainty. Something better. Trust. Trust in themselves. Trust in each other. Trust in the future. The future remained unknown. Challenges still awaited. Disagreements would continue. Life would remain unpredictable. Yet neither feared those realities as much anymore. Because they were finally building their relationship on truth rather than illusion. And truth creates resilience. The chapter of uncertainty was not over. But it was changing. The questions that once divided them were beginning to unite them. The differences that once created tension were creating understanding. And slowly, almost invisibly, two independent lives were moving toward a shared future. A future neither could fully predict. Yet both were beginning to welcome. Because they had discovered something important. Love and freedom are not enemies. When approached honestly, they become allies. And that discovery would prepare them for the next great challenge. A challenge involving not romance, not identity, not even commitment, but purpose. The question of what kind of life they wanted to build together. Because once two people decide to share a future, a new question emerges. What is that future for? And the answer to that question would shape everything that followed. The journey was entering a new phase. A phase not about finding love, but about creating a life worth loving. Building a life worth living. There comes a point in every journey when questions must become answers. For months, Tom Norrie and Janet Trumbull had explored ideas. They had questioned society's assumptions. They had challenged each other's beliefs. They had examined love, freedom, identity, and courage. But eventually, every philosophy faces the same test. Reality. Ideas are important. But ideas alone cannot build a life. At some point, people must decide how they want to live. And that was exactly where Tom and Janet now found themselves. The excitement of discovery was giving way to something deeper. Responsibility. Not the kind of responsibility Tom once associated with business. Not obligation. Not sacrifice. Not endless duty. A different kind of responsibility. The responsibility of consciously creating a meaningful life. And that challenge was far more important than any business deal Tom had ever negotiated. Because for the first time, the subject wasn't money. The subject was life itself. One evening, while sitting together during a quiet conversation, Janet asked a simple question. If money were no longer the primary goal, then what should replace it? The question seemed straightforward. Yet neither answered immediately. Because most people spend their lives chasing something without ever asking why. They pursue wealth, status, recognition, achievement. And often they assume those things will automatically create happiness. Tom once believed that. Now he wasn't so sure. The more he reflected, the clearer it became. Money was useful. Important even. But money was not a destination. It was a tool. And tools exist to serve purposes. They are not purposes themselves. For years he had confused the two. Many people do. They spend decades accumulating resources while neglecting the life those resources were supposed to support. Eventually, they discover an uncomfortable truth. A successful career does not guarantee a successful life. The two are not always the same. Tom had learned that lesson the hard way. Now he wanted something different. The challenge was defining exactly what that meant. As the conversation continued, Janet offered an observation. She suggested that many people build their lives backward. They start by asking, how can I earn more? How can I become successful? How can I achieve security? Only afterward do they ask, what do I actually want? The sequence seemed strange once she pointed it out. Yet society encouraged it constantly. Children were taught how to succeed. Rarely were they taught how to live. Schools discussed careers. Families discussed income. Communities discussed status. Very few people discussed meaning. And because of that, many adults reached success without fulfillment. Tom understood exactly what she meant. He had lived it. For years he pursued goals he never fully examined. Not because they were wrong. Because they were inherited. They came from expectations. Traditions. Social definitions of achievement. Now he wanted definitions of his own. And so he and Janet began exploring a new question. What makes a life worthwhile? The answers varied. Meaningful work. Authentic relationships. Continuous growth. Freedom. Curiosity. Contribution. Adventure. The discussion stretched late into the evening. Neither expected a perfect answer. Perhaps no perfect answer existed. But they agreed on one important principle. A worthwhile life must be chosen deliberately. It cannot be inherited blindly. That realization became the foundation of everything that followed. Gradually, they began imagining the future. Not in terms of wealth. Not in terms of social status. But in terms of experience. How did they want their days to feel? What kind of conversations did they want to have? What kind of people did they want to become? What kind of impact did they want to leave behind? These questions transformed the discussion. Because they focused attention on life itself rather than external measurements. And life, unlike money, cannot be stored. It cannot be saved for later. It is happening now. Every day. Every hour. Every moment. Tom often reflected on the years he spent postponing happiness. Waiting for future success. Waiting for future freedom. Waiting for future fulfillment. Now he saw the danger. The future is important. But life only exists in the present. People who sacrifice every present moment for a future dream sometimes discover they have missed life entirely. Janet shared this concern. She believed balance mattered. Not balance in the superficial sense. But balance between preparation and experience. Between ambition and enjoyment. Between responsibility and freedom. Too much focus on either extreme created problems. A meaningful life required both. As their vision expanded, another subject emerged. Work. The very topic that had triggered Tom's transformation in the first place. For years he viewed work as an obligation. Something endured in exchange for income. Janet challenged that perspective. Work occupies a significant portion of life. Perhaps the largest portion. If work remains disconnected from meaning, then a large part of life remains disconnected from meaning as well. This observation affected Tom deeply. Because it suggested a new possibility. Perhaps work should not merely support life. Perhaps work could become an expression of life. An extension of values. A contribution. A source of purpose. Not every job offers that opportunity. Yet the principle remained powerful. Human beings thrive when their actions align with their beliefs. The more alignment exists, the more meaningful life becomes. The less alignment exists, the more conflict emerges. Tom had experienced both. And he preferred alignment. Another topic soon followed. Time. The one resource every human being shares. Rich or poor. Famous or unknown. Successful or struggling. Everyone receives 24 hours each day. No one receives more. No one receives less. This reality fascinated Janet. Because society often treated money as the ultimate resource. Yet time was far more valuable. Lost money can be recovered. Lost time cannot. Once a day passes, it never returns. Once a year ends, it is gone forever. The implication was obvious. A person's life is essentially a collection of moments. How those moments are spent determines everything. Tom thought about the office again. The endless hours. The endless routines. The years consumed by obligations he no longer valued. Regret appeared briefly. But only briefly. Because regret serves little purpose. The past teaches lessons. Then it must be released. The future demands attention. And for the first time in years, Tom felt genuinely excited about the future. Not because everything was certain. Because uncertainty no longer frightened him. That transformation surprised him. The younger Tom desperately sought guarantees. The newer Tom valued possibility. The difference was profound. Possibility invites growth. Guarantees often limit it. As the months passed, the vision Tom and Janet shared became increasingly clear. They did not want a life organized around appearances. They did not want success defined by other people. They did not want endless accumulation without purpose. Instead, they wanted something simpler. And perhaps something more difficult. They wanted authenticity. A life aligned with values. A life built consciously rather than accidentally. A life that reflected who they truly were. Not who society expected them to become. This goal sounded simple. Yet achieving it required constant awareness. Because social pressure never disappears. Expectations never disappear. The temptation to conform never disappears. People must choose authenticity repeatedly. Day after day. Year after year. The choice never ends. Yet Tom no longer feared that challenge. Because he understood something important. The purpose of life is not perfection. It is growth. Growth requires mistakes. Growth requires uncertainty. Growth requires courage. And courage had become one of the defining themes of his journey. The courage to leave. The courage to question. The courage to love. The courage to change. Every major transformation in his life began with courage. And every future transformation would require it as well. One evening, as another long conversation came to an end, Janet offered a thought that stayed with him. She suggested that happiness is not something people find. It is something they build. Moment by moment. Choice by choice. Day by day. Tom considered the idea carefully. The more he reflected, the more accurate it seemed. Happiness was not hidden somewhere in the future. It was created through the way life was lived. Through relationships. Purpose. Growth. Meaning. Freedom. The realization felt both simple and profound. For years he searched for happiness through achievement. Now he understood it differently. Achievement may contribute. But happiness emerges from alignment. Alignment between actions and values. Between choices and beliefs. Between life and purpose. That understanding changed everything. Because it transformed success from an external goal into an internal experience. And internal experiences cannot be measured by bank accounts. Only by the quality of life itself. The journey Tom began inside that office was reaching a new stage. The businessman searching for freedom had become a man searching for meaning. And increasingly, he was finding it. Not through wealth. Not through status. But through awareness. Through growth. Through love. Through intentional living. The future remained unwritten. Challenges still waited ahead. Life would continue testing everything he had learned. But now he possessed something far more valuable than certainty. He possessed direction. And sometimes direction matters more than destination. Because a meaningful life is not built in a single moment. It is built one choice at a time. One day at a time. One courageous step at a time. And for Tom Norrie and Janet Trumbull, that journey was only beginning. The next chapter would reveal the final and most powerful lesson of all. The lesson that ties together money, freedom, love, purpose, and happiness. The lesson at the heart of the entire story. The lesson that answers the question. What is life really for? The ultimate lesson, what is life really for? Every journey eventually arrives at a final question. Not the question of money. Not the question of success. Not even the question of love. A deeper question. The question hidden beneath all the others. What is life really for? For Tom Norrie, this question had been waiting from the very beginning. It waited in the office where he spent 8 years of his life. It waited in the mountains of paperwork. It waited in his growing dissatisfaction. It waited in his rebellion against routine. It waited in his conversations with Janet. And now, after everything he had experienced, he was finally ready to face it. The answer would change everything. Because when Tom first began his journey, he believed life was about achievement. Like many people, he assumed the purpose of life was progress. To earn more. To accomplish more. To become more successful. Society encouraged this belief constantly. From childhood onward, people are asked similar questions. What do you want to be? What career will you choose? How much success will you achieve? Rarely are they asked something different. What kind of life do you want to live? The distinction seems small. But it changes everything. One question focuses on achievement. The other focuses on experience. One focuses on external results. The other focuses on internal reality. Tom spent years pursuing external results. Now he was discovering the importance of internal reality. And that discovery revealed something profound. Life is not merely a problem to solve. It is an experience to live. Many people spend decades preparing for life. Preparing for future happiness. Preparing for future success. Preparing for future freedom. Yet preparation can become a trap. Because while people prepare, life continues passing by. Days become years. Years become decades. And eventually they discover they have spent so much time preparing for life that they forgot to live it. Tom came dangerously close to making that mistake. The business offered security. But security became an excuse. An excuse to postpone dreams. To postpone exploration. To postpone happiness. To postpone life itself. The realization was painful. Yet it contained an important lesson. The future matters. But not at the expense of the present. A meaningful future is built from meaningful days. And meaningful days can only be lived now. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. This insight transformed the way Tom viewed time. For most of his life, he treated time like an unlimited resource. There would always be more opportunities. More years. More chances. But gradually he recognized the truth. Time is the only resource that can never be replaced. Money can be earned again. Property can be recovered. Careers can be rebuilt. Time cannot. Every hour spent is gone forever. Every day disappears permanently. Every year becomes history. The realization created urgency. Not panic. Not anxiety. Awareness. An awareness that life is precious precisely because it is temporary. This idea became central to everything Tom believed. Because once a person truly understands the value of time, many priorities begin changing. Arguments seem less important. Status seems less important. Approval seems less important. Experiences become more important. Relationships become more important. Meaning becomes more important. The things that genuinely enrich life move to the center. Everything else begins fading into the background. Janet understood this instinctively. Throughout their relationship, she repeatedly challenged assumptions about success. Not because she opposed achievement, but because she opposed unconscious achievement. She believed people should know why they are pursuing something. Every goal carries a cost. Every ambition requires sacrifice. The question is whether the sacrifice is worth it. Too many people never ask. They simply follow the crowd. The result is predictable. They achieve goals that do not satisfy them. They arrive at destinations they never truly wanted. They spend years climbing ladders only to discover the ladders were leaning against the wrong wall. Tom nearly became one of those people. His escape from the business was not merely a career change. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that life belongs to the person living it. Not to society. Not to expectations. Not to tradition. The responsibility of creating a meaningful life cannot be delegated. Each individual must accept it personally. That responsibility frightened Tom at first. Freedom always does. People often imagine freedom as the absence of responsibility. In reality, freedom creates responsibility. The freedom to choose means accepting the consequences of choices. The freedom to define your life means accepting ownership of your life. Many people avoid freedom for this reason. They prefer instructions, rules, expectations, predetermined paths. Those things provide comfort. But comfort often limits growth. Tom learned that growth requires uncertainty. Growth requires risk. Growth requires courage. Every important transformation in his journey emerged from courage. The courage to question. The courage to leave. The courage to love. The courage to change. And perhaps courage itself was one of the ultimate lessons. Because fear never disappears completely. Fear accompanies every meaningful decision. Anyone waiting for fear to vanish before acting will wait forever. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. Tom finally understood this. And understanding it transformed his life. Yet even courage was not the final answer. Something deeper remained. Love. Not romantic love alone. A broader kind of love. Love for life. Love for learning. Love for people. Love for experiences. Love gives meaning to everything else. Without love, success feels empty. Without love, achievement feels hollow. Without love, even freedom loses significance. Love transforms existence from survival into living. Janet helped Tom understand this. Not through speeches. Not through lectures. Through example. She lived authentically. Thought independently. Loved honestly. And in doing so, she demonstrated what a meaningful life could look like. A life guided by values rather than appearances. A life shaped by awareness rather than habit. A life chosen consciously rather than inherited automatically. That example changed Tom forever. As he reflected on everything he had learned, one truth became increasingly clear. The purpose of life is not accumulation. Not money. Not status. Not possessions. Those things may have value. But they are not the destination. The destination is growth. Connection. Experience. Meaning. The destination is becoming fully alive. Many people spend their lives searching for a secret formula. A single answer. A universal rule. But perhaps life does not work that way. Perhaps the purpose of life is not discovering one perfect answer. Perhaps the purpose is continuing the search itself. Continuing to learn. Continuing to grow. Continuing to love. Continuing to explore. The journey never truly ends. And maybe that is exactly what makes it beautiful. As Tom looked toward the future, he no longer sought certainty. He no longer sought guarantees. He no longer demanded perfect answers. Instead, he embraced possibility. Because possibility contains hope. Possibility contains adventure. Possibility contains life. The young man who once sat trapped behind a desk had changed completely. He still valued responsibility. Still valued effort. Still valued achievement. But those things no longer controlled him. They served him. Not the other way around. And that distinction made all the difference. At the beginning of this story, Tom believed he was searching for freedom. Later he believed he was searching for love. Then he believed he was searching for identity. Eventually he realized all those searches pointed toward the same destination. A meaningful life. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden at the heart of this entire journey. Life is not about earning a living. It is about creating a life worth living. Money matters. But life matters more. Success matters. But meaning matters more. Achievement matters. But experience matters more. Because in the end, people rarely regret the money they failed to earn. They regret the life they failed to live. The risks they never took. The dreams they never pursued. The love they never expressed. The moments they never appreciated. Tom finally understood this truth. And understanding it gave him something he had been seeking from the very beginning. Not wealth. Not status. Not certainty. Wisdom. The wisdom to know that life is happening right now. The wisdom to choose deliberately. The wisdom to value time. The wisdom to pursue meaning. The wisdom to love deeply. The wisdom to live fully. And perhaps that is the ultimate lesson for all of us. Your money or your life is not really a choice between wealth and poverty. It is a choice between unconscious living and conscious living. Between following expectations and following values. Between existing and truly living. The choice belongs to each of us. Every day. With every decision. With every hour. With every moment. And that choice ultimately determines the story of our lives. So as this journey comes to an end, one question remains. Not for Tom. For you. What kind of life are you building? Because the answer to that question will shape everything that follows. And unlike money, unlike status, unlike success, that answer truly matters.